For over a decade, Drake was known as the biggest rapper in the game, but in 2024, he was hip-hop's #1 enemy.
Drake is not that important. He is a sickness in the game.
Although as time passed, things haven't played out like some people thought. Hip-hop is falling off the charts.
Realize the dot era was a failure. It's tough for the Iceman. This was the weakest era in history.
And some are going back on their criticisms.
Drake, if you listening to this, homie, shine. I don't want to see you lose.
But what if I told you Drake has been predicting this all along?
Yeah, I've seen people I would never expect do foul.
And some of the same people who wanted to end his career now might need him more than ever.
Y'all want to make a bet? I guarantee when Drake drop, everybody and their mama go check out the album.
One of the biggest storylines surrounding Drake's 2024 rap civil war was the growing belief that hip-hop might finally be moving on from him. For the first time in years, people openly talked about Drake like somebody who was finally failing, with conversations everywhere questioning whether his run at the top was coming to an end.
But it's not a free pack of ass, but it's not, those aren't the level of the pivot post-Scorpion of how to get your back. I don't understand what he's doing.
Major voices in hip-hop like Joe Budden and Ebro became some of the loudest people publishing their opinions. Ebro even went as far as calling Drake something pretty crazy.
Drake is not that important. He is a sickness in the game.
While Joe, on the other hand, who has his own reasons, repeatedly criticized Drake throughout the fallout.
The selfish, lying, manipulative sack who has made enemies for 15 years.
But once the rumors of Iceman started building again, a lot of those same conversations suddenly started to sound a bit different.
It's Drake Day, Iceman, baby. Tune into the Ebro show right now. All Drake.
And I'm listening to Iceman. Nothing they can do about it. None of y'all can stop me from going to iTunes, hitting that button, double click.
Yo, I ain't gonna lie, man. Yo, these guys, Joe, I love you. Your acting is bad. Just like everybody else acting. He knows Iceman finna pay these goddamn bills.
But this pattern didn't just fit the media. It slowly started showing up around artists as well, especially people who had spent years closely connected to Drake publicly until they suddenly started aligning themselves against him during the fallout. But for as experienced as Drake is, this next person we're going to talk about is one of the last people he ever expected to betray him.
You dropped 3 mid projects. Hey man, it was fun while it lasted. You're washed.
One of the clearest examples of how quickly people shifted around Drake during the fallout ended up being Rick Ross, because only months earlier, nothing suggested the friendship had changed at all. In January of 2024, Rick Ross was still on live stream complimenting Drake and speaking about him like everything was normal.
Like one of your favorite songs with Drake?
Stay scheming, I'm gonna say stay scheming. So that was most definitely magical.
But once the momentum around the anti-Drake wave started building, Ross quickly chose a side and joined Metro Boomin and Future, stepping right into the biggest moment against Drake that we've ever seen. Not to mention, Ross even dropped a diss track called Champagne Moments in response to Drake dissing him on push-ups. And because of all the history between them, Ross's choice to switch up was definitely shocking. So the real question is, why did Rick Ross switch up? He ended up pointing to an alleged cease and desist situation involving French Montana as part of the issue.
I unfollowed you because you sent the mother cease and desist to French Montana.
But for a friendship that had lasted over a decade, it still didn't completely explain how everything seemingly changed overnight. Because even French Montana, the one apparently being done wrong by Drake, never had a bad word to say about him publicly.
You and Drake still didn't speak, right?
No, it's my guy.
Yeah, good.
I never went back and forth with Drake.
Poppy.
Yeah, no, Drake my guy.
Although, there were some signs that things may have been shifting behind the scenes between Drake and Rick Ross prior to what many see as a betrayal. First, a rumored Rick Ross and Drake collaboration album never came out, and Drake also never appeared on the project Ross and Meek Mill were putting together in 2023.
Greatest of all time, Drake feature. And yes, Meek Mill and Rose, we with the boy heavily. You might hear him on some of this new shit that's coming out very soon, you heard?
You better believe it.
Although, it really seems like Rick Ross simply took an opportunity that made sense business-wise, as at the time, Drake looked like a sinking ship. But once that period of Drake versus everyone came, it wasn't like Ross just simply featured on the album and that was it. He mocked Drake constantly online, posted jokes at his expense, and it really seemed like he had real hatred towards him.
That right there, I know Drake would have loved that like Millie Bobby Brown. He would have been all in them DMs.
BBL Drizzy, I'm at the pool party, and they just called you a petty.
But what made this fallout hit differently was that 1, Rick Ross was not some random artist Drake barely knew, and 2, with everyone else that picked the other side, there's at least some type of reason we can kind of understand why there's issues. Yet in this scenario, all Drake had ever done was openly admire Rick Ross before everything fell apart.
Ross is like one of my OGs, one of my mentors, and one of my favorite people in the game.
But even after all the tension, there was one thing that never really changed, and it really begins to show that Drake knew what was going to happen all along.
But now I kind of see why Ross was apologizing, right? Come on, they singing Drake's part more than his part.
For all the publicity this beef got, there was one contradiction around the fallout that slowly became impossible to ignore. Rick Ross never really stopped relying on the music he made with Drake. Even after spending months mocking him publicly, some of the biggest moments in Ross's live shows were still coming from records connected to Drake, and the reactions during those songs often felt bigger than almost anything else in his set. This was the part that made the whole situation start looking a lot more strange looking back, because even when trying to distance himself publicly, Rick Ross never fully separated himself from what those records and Drake did for his career. Although, it wasn't just the fans noticing this. During Ross's 2026 Versus battle with French Montana, reports circulated that Drake had personally cleared the use of several of those records for the event.
Drake had to clear those songs to be performed at the Versus, which is, I don't know if people know that or not.
He cleared those to show all the other rappers, you can't do a Versus without the songs that I gave you.
Obviously.
And if this is true, it adds another layer to their entire beef. Because after the public disrespect, Ross was still benefiting from the music tied to Drake during one of the biggest live moments connected to his name in years. And the biggest boss had to get permission. But as time passed, Ross himself also started to sound a bit different. And then eventually during an interview with Ebro on Apple Music, Ross openly admitted he still wanted to see Drake succeed and win.
Drake, if you listening to this, homie, shine. I don't want to see you lose.
To many people, this felt like a complete shift in tone. He no longer sounded like somebody trying to completely move away from Drake. If anything, he started sounding more like somebody realizing how difficult it actually was to leave a relationship that benefited him for over a decade musically and even culturally. And the whole situation comes back to one of the biggest points Drake had been making from the beginning.
Every song that made it on a chart he got from Drizzy.
That even after publicly turning against him, people still need him one way or another. But believe it or not, this isn't the only example of Drake making his enemies look weak or predicting that they would come back around. And to many, this next example might be the most embarrassing of them all. During the peak of the anti-Drake wave in 2024, A$AP Rocky suddenly found himself back in the center of hip-hop conversation once again, something that hadn't happened to him for many years. And judging by some of Rocky's own comments during the beef,
Pluto, Metro, put me on the first one.
Part of him almost seemed mad he hadn't been brought into the situation earlier. But once he officially joined his side during the rap civil war, things didn't play out the way he probably expected them to. And to really understand why that happened, you have to go back a little bit earlier. At one point, Rocky and Drake were actually close, going back to the early stages of his career when Drake brought him on tour at a time when that kind of exposure really mattered. Something Rocky himself even acknowledged.
I'm the only person that put on for me when I ain't have nobody was Drake. I forever owe Drake.
Over time though, that relationship slowly started changing, and a lot of it eventually traced back to Rihanna. Drake had been publicly tied to her for years, so once Rocky and Rihanna became serious publicly, it added a whole nother layer to the situation that carried a lot of history and tension underneath it. But by 2023, Drake brought some of that tension back into the music on his album For All the Dogs, with multiple lines that made it clear he was still feeling a type of way about the entire situation.
Yeah, and the sex was average with you, and I had way better bitches than TBH. That man, he still with you, he can't leave you.
And by the time 2024 exploded, Rocky had already inserted himself directly into the situation. And for him, the timing was pretty interesting. Around that same time period, Rocky was already being talked about more for fashion, celebrity appearances, and his public image than actual music releases, after such a long gap between albums following his 2018 project called Testing. And that made part of Drake's angle on Family Matters stand out even more.
I ain't even know you rap still, cause they only talking about your fit again.
But once the initial moment started fading, the momentum did not carry over the same way into the music. The rollout for Don't Be Dumb, Rocky's first album since 2018, quickly started feeling messy, with singles dropping at different points and delays surrounding the release. But once the album finally came out, it still felt smaller than people expected after years of build-up surrounding it. Some people liked the project, but others felt like it didn't justify the wait.
This was pretty much the longest album rollout of all time.
Overall, I'm not really sure if Don't Be Dumb is going to be enough to bring Rocky back to the cultural prominence he once had in the early 2010s. The album isn't quite that good, I would say.
It kind of felt all over the place.
And in a weird way, some of the reactions surrounding the album ended up sounding similar to another line Drake had already thrown at Rocky earlier during the fallout.
Even when you do drop, they gon' say you should've modeled cause it's mid again.
Not to mention, Rocky's disses at Drake seemed to generate more conversation than the actual music itself. And once the rollout started struggling, along with the mixed reactions that came after, the whole situation started looking familiar when we look back at it. Because despite Rocky saying this to Drake about his album For All the Dogs,
heard you drop your latest, funny how it just came and went.
Many could say that his album Don't Be Dumb did the exact same thing, all the while still having Drake's presence to promote it.
I just read a couple reviews of this album, and like Drake is in the first paragraph of both of the albums. And when I was scrolling through Twitter this morning, almost every post that I saw about the album was basically like, oh, it's just Drake.
Whether it was old Rihanna, diss records, interviews, or fans just revisiting the tension between them, all the attention kept circling back to Drake one way or another. But as strange as the Rocky situation became afterwards, the next fallout may have revealed something even more uncomfortable about how people around Drake started moving once the culture turned against him. Because unlike A$AP Rocky, this next person had spent years publicly benefiting from Drake's success before suddenly going quiet when things got tough. And when you really look back at it now, the timing of it looks pretty suspicious.
And what I love about Drake is he cares about me and he cares about me winning. And you don't find many people like that.
Unlike a lot of Drake's other enemies who openly went against him, DJ Khaled never did. He just stayed quiet. But when we look back, that silence started making old rumors about the two, and some of Drake's old jokes about Khaled never being satisfied hit a little bit differently, especially when we consider how many of Khaled's biggest moments involved Drake. But by the start of 2024, from the outside looking in, everything between Drake and DJ Khaled still looked solid publicly. Khaled was already talking heavily about Drake's involvement in his next album, repeatedly mentioning that Drake would appear twice on the project and building a large part of the hype around those records specifically.
Hey yo, Drake Fan Hub. You know I got 2 Drakes in the can, 2 champagne poppies on my album. You know that, right?
And in late 2023, Drake even brought Khaled out during a Miami show. And heading into early 2024, the energy never really changed. Khaled kept mentioning those same Drake records in interviews and across social media. In one interview, Khaled described their relationship as something deeper than music. We're real brothers. I don't have to talk to him for months, and it's like we talk every day. I've been blessed to be able to work with him in the early stages of his career. Drake got love for Khaled, and Khaled got love for Drake. Everything surrounding the situation still sounded good publicly, but over the years, Drake had joked multiple times about Khaled constantly asking him for more records.
Khaled, man, like this guy's off his rocker. It's like you give someone everything you have and they're just like, another one. Every 5 seconds on my phone, asking me for something.
And even DJ Academics openly talked about Khaled practically begging for records behind the scenes because of how important those collaborations were to his projects commercially.
You begged Drake for all those records, and he gave you all those records because you wanted it. Look at DJ Khaled. If you really go back, and I hear all the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, Khaled would go to his label, say, I have a Drake song, and they would release him millions of dollars in budget, in advances. So Drake is the guy who has guaranteed you millions of dollars because you're promoting and you're acting like he's the thing to sell your album. So you're getting millions because of it.
For a long time, people mostly laughed those comments off because the records were successful almost every time they linked. But after everything that followed, some of those dynamics started looking a bit different. As not long after their last link at the Miami concert, the circumstances surrounding Drake completely changed. He was suddenly going through the roughest public stretch of his career, and he was pretty much all on his own. And during that period, a lot of people Drake had worked closely with stayed completely quiet, and that included Khaled.
He comes under fire and your thumbs stop working. Your mouth stop working. You act like you don't know him. Yo, Khaled, let me tell you this. The fence sitting you did, I'm telling you, you're getting punished for that. We didn't know where you were for 8 months!
He never picked a side or had any criticism, but there also wasn't any support, especially considering how often Khaled publicly described their relationship as something a lot deeper than music. And when we look back at this, the silence really stands out. Because while everything surrounding Drake was happening publicly, Khaled still kept promoting those records like they're going to be one of the centerpieces of his album.
You're not going to sit quiet for 8 months while my guy gets jumped. And then as soon as you look up and be like, y'all done jumping him? I bet, let me drop a song with it. No, it's not happening. My boy was getting jumped, kicking him, stomping him, doing whatever. How the f you jumping out, Tomo? Hey, we got 2 new Drake songs. What?
But what happened next probably still haunts DJ Khaled to this day. In February of 2025, DJ Khaled officially launched the rollout for his 14th studio album, A Lamb of God. But this time, he went bigger than usual. Instead of a normal announcement, Khaled released a 7-minute trailer that was like a short film, showing himself in the middle of a heist while protecting the files connected to the album. And throughout the trailer, one detail kept getting repeated over and over. Those same 2 Drake records. And at first, everything looked like it was working. The trailer picked up attention quickly, people reacted positively to it online, and he was beginning to get some momentum. But by the next day, the entire situation changed. Drake responded directly under DJ Khaled's post by saying, "Drake who? Drake Bell?" It was a short comment, but the response immediately changed how people looked at the rollout. Because in that moment, it suddenly became crystal clear that Khaled was building a major part of the album around somebody who no longer seemed to be friends with him. And shortly after Drake hit post on his comment, everything Khaled had just launched started disappearing. The trailer was taken down, the promo, and the rollout basically disappeared almost immediately. People ended up turning it into a meme, and I actually broke down Drake's response and why he seemed to be mad at the time. But as Iceman was released, it seems like Drake finally confirmed what his real issues with DJ Khaled were.
And Khaled, you know what I mean. The beef was fully live, you went halal and got on your deen. And your people are still waiting for a free Palestine.
This might sound naive, but I think Drake actually bought into to think, oh no, this guy's like really my guy. That when some rap shit happens, Khaled doesn't even hit him like, yo bro, are you good? You know what I heard? The first time Khaled pops out is advertising a song. He doesn't say, bro, you're good. Yo, bro, I still love you. Says nothing. You got to deal with that to be like, oh, this was never my friend. This guy's an opportunist.
And as you just heard, the entire situation points back to what Drake had been hinting at through this entire time. A lot of people publicly distanced themselves from him once the backlash started. But over time, many of those same people still ended up circling back because of how valuable Drake remained to their careers, which seems a lot like Khaled. But in a sad way, the situation almost felt worse than some of Drake's direct enemies, because at least with an enemy, you're always going to know where they stand. And speaking of enemies, the next person we need to talk about is probably the clearest example of somebody who genuinely wanted Drake finished publicly. At least that's what they thought they wanted in the beginning. Out of everybody involved in Drake's 20v1, Metro Boomin may have ended up learning Drake's lesson the hardest. Because during the peak of everything, Metro was one of the main people shaping the entire movement, even pushing the idea that people needed to pick a side. But once some of that energy eventually started going back to him, the whole thing started to look a bit different, especially when regret became part of the conversation. By the early 2020s, Metro was no longer viewed as just a producer behind the scenes. At certain points, it felt like he was becoming one of the most important people shaping the sound and direction of rap itself. But around that same time, his relationship with Drake quickly started shifting. At one point, the two had been pretty connected, with Metro and Drake working pretty closely together at times, and he was part of the circle surrounding some of Metro's biggest creative moments. But over time, small moments started adding to the tension publicly, including Drake being removed from a song called Trance on Metro's Heroes and Villains album, which immediately led to speculation that something behind the scenes had already changed them.
What happened with the Trance record? Because Drake, obviously that his verse leaked. Why did that version not make the album?
It just really wasn't no room. It was just
Right.
wasn't no room. It wasn't nothing personal. It just wasn't no room. So
Somebody said, what do you mean it was no? That's what I'm trying to say. It's like, oh no.
Later on, Metro described the fallout as a personal issue that left him hurt and disappointed, eventually suggesting Drake had been insensitive following the passing of his mother, making it clear the tension between them had become much deeper than music.
The story goes, Drake was either trying to get on a record or trying to get this beat to finish up a project. Metro's mother had just passed away, right? He never said Metro's mom and nothing like that, but I think he was a little bit pushy, allegedly. Like he was just like, yo bro, could you send me that beat, bro? Could you send me that beat, yo bro? Now, I don't know the timeline of like, is it 2 days after? Is it 2 months? He just wasn't in that type of mode.
Whatever the full truth of the situation is, the tension between them never disappeared. Over time, it just became more impossible to ignore. And when Metro and Future released We Don't Trust You, it was on full display.
It's time for beef. It's time for war. Bobby Alsdorf, get your out the party. It's time for war. No more features. No more shout outs. No more cosigns. None of that.
What had previously felt like separate frustration around Drake suddenly started feeling like a unified movement that Metro was right in the middle of. Artists who had already had previous issues with Drake were now appearing on the same project, publicly aligning themselves on Metro's side. And right in the middle of that was Kendrick Lamar. When Like That dropped, it debuted at number 1 and immediately changed the direction of hip hop in 2024 and to some, beyond. What followed became one of the biggest rap battles hip hop had seen in years, and for a period of time, it genuinely felt like the atmosphere on Drake had completely changed, and Metro was the one behind it. Drake eventually responded directly on push-ups, mocking Metro with the now viral line,
Metro, shut your ass up and make some drums.
But for a while, the anti-energy surrounding the battle became almost unavoidable online. And for a period of time, it genuinely felt like the public opinion around Drake had completely shifted permanently. But once the peak of the battle slowly started fading, the focus eventually moved back onto the artists themselves and what they're going to do next outside of the feud. And little did Metro know the type of feelings he was going to be dealing with. Going into 2025, Metro suddenly found himself dealing with a different kind of pressure. He released the album A Futuristic Summer in August of 2025, and the project arrived with major expectations attached to it because of the run he had already been on. But the conversation around the project quickly turned more negative online.
Metro, I'm taking you off of my instant purchase list.
2025, bro, this is what we're doing?
Why not?
It's supposed to be a futuristic summer. I didn't sign up for this.
I will say this, I'll say it again. It would surprise me if any of this is played anywhere for any reason. Trash. This is garbage.
Metro's star power that we saw when he was aligned with Future, sometimes we see him aligned with Savage. It's not when Metro stands by himself.
And when we compare this to Drake, who was in a very similar situation the year before, everything starts to look a bit different. Because during the height of the feud, Metro had helped create an environment where Drake was being hit from every direction all at once. Although as the focus landed back onto him in a much smaller way, the pressure surrounding that kind of visibility suddenly took a toll on him.
What has Metro Boomin's response to his album going triple cardboard been? Well, he has not taken it well, as he's been very clearly upset that people have not liked the project, with him going on to say that the album wasn't made for the people that didn't like it.
Metro helped create one of the loudest anti-Drake moments hip-hop had ever seen. But later on, he also experienced exactly what Drake had. How quickly public opinion can start changing all at once and it comes back on you. And although Metro became one of the loudest voices against Drake publicly, he wasn't the only person helping push the shift against him. But what happened during the release of Drake's album Iceman is something Metro or anyone else ever saw coming. Future and Drake had spent years attached at the hip musically. At one point, it genuinely felt like they would never miss. So watching Future become one of the main names connected to the anti-Drake wave caught a lot of people by surprise. Especially because during the peak of everything, the idea of Future ending up back on a Drake album sounded pretty impossible.
Future is a voice and controls such a stronghold in hip hop, and him being a part of an album, 2 albums necessarily, that came out saying, "We still don't trust you." To me, a lot of this doesn't start, and we probably don't get to the point of Drake and Kendrick squaring up if Future's not a part of this.
When Future took part in We Don't Trust You and We Still Don't Trust You, it seemed like he wasn't even trying to be subtle. The title alone was directed at Drake, and the entire energy around the projects made it feel like the relationship was completely done. And over time, it became obvious the issues between them were pretty deep. Whether it was the fact that What a Time to Be Alive 2 never came out, women getting involved, sneak dissing, jealousy, or resentment quietly building behind the scenes, something clearly broke between them. But as time passed, Future slowly started pulling back from the situation publicly. Even after all the diss records and people speculating why they had problems, Future later sounded almost dismissive about the entire thing. When GQ asked him about the Drake situation, he laughed it off by saying, "There was a beef?" Although the response aged very differently, because after everything that happened, Future still ended up back on Iceman anyway.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Free man. Oh, let's go!
Which suddenly made a lot of Drake's original points during the battle start to hit differently. After Future called him a #1 fan, Drake answered back on push-ups by saying,
"I could never be nobody #1 fan. Your first #1, I had to put it in your hand."
At the time, people mainly looked at this as disrespect, which it obviously was. But after Iceman, the line almost started sounding like Drake was reminding Future that no matter how ugly things became publicly, the connection between them was still too important to fully walk away from. Not to mention, he clearly still felt something positive after he said this on Family Matters.
Shit made me sick to my stomach, we ain't never really been through it.
And all of the fans clearly felt the same way, as even during the peak of their issues, people never stopped asking for Drake and Future to get back together. And that's exactly what makes their timeline even more crazy. After spending an entire year watching the culture try to push Drake out, one of the biggest artists attached to that movement still circled right back to the Drake album anyway. And in the end, the Future situation almost became the perfect example of the point Drake had been making the entire time. Hip-hop keeps trying to move away from him, but somehow it always finds its way back. Although, you need to keep that point in mind for who we're going to talk about next, because after what many say was the end of Drake's career and the start of a new era, only time was going to tell if that was actually going to come true. In 2013, Drake made a bold statement, arguing that Kendrick Lamar had moments in hip-hop while he always kept his hands on the pulse of the culture.
He's giving people like moments, you know, like that verse was a moment to talk about. When it comes to competition, I'm more worried about consistency. I'm more worried about bodies of work.
And more than a decade later, Kendrick ended up creating one of the biggest moments hip-hop had ever seen. Because what started with a feature on Like That quickly changed the entire direction of hip-hop once Not Like Us fully took over. The song was not only dominating hip-hop, but it was showing everywhere in real life too. Crowds were screaming every word at clubs and festivals, NBA players were quoting it publicly, and moments like Kendrick's Juneteenth pop-out concert turned the entire situation into something that felt larger than a rap battle itself. Even people who normally were not involved in hip-hop knew exactly what was happening, and because of how widespread everything became, it created something rap rarely has anymore, a feeling of total focus on the genre and full support of one person. Because even though Drake was the top guy to many, he always had almost just as many haters. But during that period, almost everything felt centered and supported around Kendrick Lamar. At the same time, Drake was suddenly in a position people were not used to seeing him in. Instead of the focus revolving around his next album, his next hit, or whatever move he was about to make next, the attention was all about whether his run at the top was finally over. And because of how explosive the Kendrick moment became, people stopped treating it like a normal rap battle where one artist simply outperformed another for a few weeks. A lot of people genuinely viewed it as the end of the Drake era completely. But once the moment became that large culturally, the expectations surrounding Kendrick immediately became much bigger too. It was no longer about whether he had won the battle or created the biggest diss record. the expectation became that Kendrick would now fully take the position Drake had held for years. People started talking about a new beginning called the Dot Era. But once the initial shock of everything started slowing down, the conversation gradually began changing again. And that's where Drake's older comments about Kendrick start sounding very different in hindsight. Because Kendrick absolutely had the biggest moment. But over time, it became clear that having the biggest moment and holding the center of rap down long term are two completely different things. The culture slowly stopped feeling locked into one conversation the way it had during the peak of the battle. And once that happened, people started noticing the difference between dominating a moment and maintaining continuous presence much more clearly. Part of the reason that difference became so noticeable is because Kendrick has never really operated the same way Drake does. Kendrick's career has historically been built around massive moments, carefully planned albums, major appearances, and long periods of absence in between them. And those times away often made Kendrick's returns feel bigger, but they also created a very different relationship with hip-hop compared to Drake, who spent more than a decade staying constantly visible and continuously attached to the middle of not just hip-hop, but music in general. And after the battle settled, the difference became much harder to ignore.
After Kendrick came out, did his thing in the battle, drops GNX, he basically says, watch the party die, and nobody acknowledged that was probably the worst ideology to exist. Watch the party die was actually watching the culture of hip-hop die. You can't kill something without giving it an alternative, and all he wanted to do was kill it. I thought this whole Kendrick supposed era, dot era, he's left the people in shambles.
And if we use the Super Bowl performance as an example, which at one point felt like the start of something completely new, eventually started feeling like the closing chapter of that moment instead of the beginning of a completely new era. Kendrick is still massively respected, still successful, and still viewed as one of the greatest, if not the greatest rapper alive. But the non-stop feeling of hip-hop revolving entirely around him slowly began fading much faster than people originally thought. And all of that reinforced Drake's original argument about the 20v1. Even after the biggest loss of his career, people could still not stop focusing on him. For years, one of the biggest criticisms surrounding Drake was that the audience had become exhausted by how present he really was. But once it actually looked possible that Drake might disappear from the center of rap completely, it didn't take long for that to change. But as 2025 continued and the lawsuit situation slowly cooled down, the attention gradually started shifting towards Drake's next move, especially once the conversations around Iceman began building momentum. By the time 2026 started getting closer, people were already closely following rumors surrounding the project before there was even an official release date. Although once Iceman did release, Drake definitely had disses for Kendrick about their battle.
He says white kids listen to you because they feel some guilt and that's how your soul gets fulfilled. That to me seeming Kendrick-y.
A big three anyway, there was too many chefs in the kitchen.
It's not even a silencer.
And I'm sure we still haven't seen the last of these two going back and forth. Although, when we look back at Drake predicting hip-hop would need him, the entire situation really showed us that more than anything else. For all the conversation about a new era, it somehow kept circling back to Drake anyway. And whether people support him, criticize him, or want him out of the culture completely, one thing still hasn't changed. Drake is still the name hip-hop revolves around.